Eagles insider over at 97.3 ESPN.com, John McMullen. John, how you doing on a Friday?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Josh.
So I want to start with the news that came out. Looks like Joe Walker is pretty much done. He tore his, I believe it's his ACL, it looks like. And to me, John, that emphasizes the fact that this team better do something to shore up that linebacker depth, because now it just seems like Najee Good is the only suitable backup at linebacker.
Yeah, and really before the injury, he was probably the top guy at each position. So if anyone went down, as he had been playing in the first team for Michael Kendricks, who's out with hamstring injury, he would have been the first guy off the bench at each position, even middle linebacker. But both Doug Peterson and Jim Schwartz had singled out Walker as a guy who really stood out as a young player, and both, dating back to the off-season and training camp. So he was going to make this team. He was going to make the final 53. There's no question about that. And it's just another blow at a position they could hardly afford it because the depth is so weak. Now you're talking about guys like Deontay Skinner and rookie undrafted free agents like Quentin Gauze and Mike Tavares. So they're going to have to go outside the building to bring in some depth, whether that's Stephen Tulloch, as some people have surmised since the moment he was released in Detroit, or someone else once the cuts go to 75 first and then 53. They're going to have to bring in somebody at that position. It's not good enough, and Jim Schwartz wasn't comfortable before this injury with his depth at that position.
Is Stephen Tulloch the best candidate at this point for it, or is there somebody maybe sitting on another roster somewhere that could be the one targeted?
Well, it depends the way the Eagles want to go. I've always said, remember, Tulloch's out there, and there's 31 other teams who haven't signed him either. And for a guy with his reputation and his resume, that tells you something. And it tells you he might be done physically. Most people assume that at this stage of his career, he's only a two-down player. And that part of it is fine. But if he's struggling physically more than that, well, then you're going to have to go in a different direction. So it depends where he is. If he's healthy, if he's ready to go, he can still play as a two-down player. He can still be a very good run defender, but he's not going to help you as a backup. He can't play special teams or anything of that nature. And obviously, linebackers, a position where the reserves, they have to be impactful on special teams. So it's very difficult with Tulloch. You either bring him in as a starter or you're not going to bring him in. Now, once you start getting the cut downs, and certainly the cut from 75 to 53, there's going to be players on the waiver wire that are better than Quentin Gauze or Mike Tavares, not only in a few situations, all over this league. So the Eagles are going to have an opportunity at some point to upgrade at this position, but it's not like they're going to get an impactful player. So it's still going to be concerned, because anytime you're picking up somebody off the waiver wire, obviously it's not a best-case scenario.
John, looking back onto the field, the Eagles had 4 interceptions last night. The defense looked very good overall. Now, of course, we know, yes, Ben Roethlisberger didn't play, Antonio Brown didn't play, Le'Veon Bell didn't play, but it was still good to see the defense, in my view, John, because most of those interceptions were not... the ball just was handed to me. I mean, Nolan Carroll made a great play. Grimes made a great play. So to me, I look at the defense as saying there are legitimate playmakers on that side of the ball.
Well, it's certainly going to be the identity of this team. It's very, very clear early on, and we've been preaching about it since the offseason. I think the most impactful acquisition for this organization is not a player. It's Jim Schwartz. This defense is going to be significantly better, and there's no question. Now, you mentioned, obviously, if Ben Roethlisberger's there, you have to be fair. The Eagles aren't picking off 4 passes in the first half. That's the reality of the situation. But as a defender, you can only go out and play who's on the field, and they dominated that group, and that's what they should have done. So that part is a big positive, and the fact that they're making plays, and cornerback is supposed to be one of the weaker positions on the defense, along with a linebacker. So the fact that Nolan Carroll is able to get the pick six, Leotis McKelvin is able to get the pass deflection that Malcolm Jenkins picks off, Aaron Grimes gets an interception. Unfortunately, he injured his shoulder. He's probably going to be out for the rest of the preseason. It was a very strong performance by Jim Schwartz's defense.
So with our 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider, John McMullen. You can follow him at JF McMullen on Twitter. You know, John, one of the guys that impressed me last night, aside from, you know, the obvious stats, was when I was watching the defense and I saw Brandon Graham flying around, I thought, finally, this guy is playing a position that he's meant to play, not this, 3-4 defense linebacker stuff they tried to make him into. Him playing the defensive end, he just looks right at home.
Yeah, he does, and I think he's the Eagles' best defensive end, and he's been the one sort of named the co-starter, along with Connor Barwin and Vinnie Curry, who are scheduled, at least at this point on the depth chart, to be the starters at right end and left end specifically. But as far as being a well-rounded player, Brandon Graham is better than both of them. And you're right, he's a natural defensive end. Now, he doesn't have the length you typically look for in the truly, truly elite defensive ends, but he's got the motor, and he's able, the thing he does better than Curry or Barwin, and significantly, is he can hold up on the edge and really set the edge in run defense. And those two guys struggle with that. So I think when it's all said and done, I think Brandon Graham's going to be on the field in that rotation more than the other two. But either way, it's a very strong group for Jim Schwartz, a very strong group for the defense, and they've been proving that early on.
Flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, John, looking at the offensive line, that was a focus for me last night. I was looking at to see how these guys did, and I thought Alan Barbary overall held his own and did a solid job overall. The guy I was a little concerned about was Isaac Seumalo, because it seemed like at times he was not shuffling his feet quickly enough. He was not moving laterally very well. It seemed like he was kind of slow on the uptake of information on the snap. And I wanted to get your impression. Is that just a rookie making rookie mistakes, or is that something the Eagles really need to be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, he's not ready, and we've talked about it before. The Eagles kind of threw him in the deep end of the pool to see if they could speed up his development as a necessity because of the Lane Johnson situation. But certainly through the first two games, he's not ready. Part of it is he wasn't here for the off-season work because of the NFL's graduation rule, and he had to go back to college because they were on the quarter system. So he was behind from both a mental and a physical standpoint, and like a lot of young players, he's getting used to the speed of the game, and it's going to take a while. But what I said, I think the Eagles understand what they have with Stefan Wisniewski, and they want to see in the preseason where Seumalo is, and if they deem he's not ready after week 3 next week in the preseason, then they'll simply put Wisniewski at left guard if Lane gets suspended for that first week. So I think that's always been the plan. I think it's still the plan. And yeah, right now, Seumalo's not ready to be a starter in this league.
John, the Eagles wide receivers have also been a focus. Obviously, they acquired Dorial Green-Beckham. He played a few plays later in the game of not much consequence in my eyes. But what I did see was that Nelson Agholor did have a couple opportunities, and literally in back-to-back plays, he makes a great catch, gets a first down. The next play, he drops the ball, and you're just like, it's like face to palm. And you're just like, can this guy just be consistent? Because you see the ability, you see what he can do, and then he just throws himself like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah, it was. He had about 10 seconds to celebrate because that was a pretty nice catch by Agholor. And then, as you mentioned, he follows it up with another miscue, and that sums him up. And it has summed him up. Look, the Eagles are very, very worried about that position, and that's why they made the trade for Joriel Greenback. I mean, they tried to get Rasheed Bailey off waivers. They tried to get him back, even after they made the trade for DGB. So it's clear it's not only Nelson Agholor, it's Josh Huff, it's Ruben Randall, it's Chris Gibbons. They know they need significant help at this position. And by the way, this is a very, very important week, Josh, because everyone kind of skips over. Jordan Matthews hasn't been on the field since getting injured in training camp with that low hit from Jalen Mills. If he's not ready for the dress rehearsal game, all of a sudden, hey, he might not be ready for week one. So this is a very important week to see where Jordan Matthews is health-wise. And if he's not capable of being on the field when the games count, well, this wide receiver group is a disaster. And the Eagles know it, and that's why they're looking to upgrade. And it's not going to stop at the DGB trade.
One guy who has played well, John, is the rookie Paul Turner. I mean, this is a guy who seems like he catches everything within his radius, which are just like, finally, someone's trying to catch the ball. I mean, the only one he didn't have, I think he said, 10 targets in the first two games, and that one was the Carson Wentz interception, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he was open. And Carson should have delivered that ball. So it should have been 10 out of 10. And at some point, you got to tip your hat to the guy who catches the football in this group, and that's what Paul Turner did. Yesterday, he had a great back shoulder catch, adjusting to the ball in the air. He's got to make this football team at this point. He's been their second-best receiver behind Jordan Matthews, and that's not good to say before Jordan got hurt, because Paul does have, I mean, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not the fastest guy in the world. There's a reason he went undrafted. It's because of his triangle measurements, and it's not what the NFL looks for. But he catches the football. And that's meaningful in this particular offense because nobody can, even Matthews, seems to do that consistently.
John, I mentioned this earlier, and I was saying, I look at the receivers right now, and I mean all of them, Matthews, Agholor, Givens, Randall, Huff, and I say, you almost would rather have, again, Todd Pinkston, James Thrash, Brown, and Mitchell, because at least you knew that if you threw the ball at them, they might catch it. Whereas with these receivers, it almost feels like it's a 50-50. What on earth is up with these guys, John? Their job in the NFL is to catch balls, and they don't.
Well, it's really, it's just not a good group. You have Jordan Matthews, really, who we talk about as a solid player, and he is a solid player. I don't want to downplay it, but he's a number 2 receiver in this league.
Right.
And the rest of them are a bunch of number 3s or number 4s at best. And that's the reality of it. I've been covering this league for a long time, and I told Mike in the past, I've seen practices where you don't see one drop football. I covered Chris Carter for years. You didn't see a drop football the entire season. Forget about a game, a practice. You didn't see drop footballs with players of that caliber. And it speaks to the fact that this is not a very good group. This is not an NFL-level group to be truly, truly successful at. And that's why when people criticize Sam Bradford and not being able to move this offense, okay, there's plenty of criticism you can throw Sam's way. But I don't know how many quarterbacks are going to get much production out of this group, out of wide receivers. Maybe Aaron Rodgers, and the list probably ends there.
John, I'm glad you brought up Sam Bradford because he threw no touchdowns yesterday, but he also threw no interceptions. And to me, that's a big deal because I look at this team and I say, if the defense can do their job week in and week out, then half the quarterback's job is to just not put his team in a bad situation, have turnovers. And I think if Sam Bradford goes out there, has 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and 3,200 yards, you potentially have a team that can compete for the division, right?
Yeah, certainly in this division, which is not projected to be all that powerful. Your winner's probably going to have 9 or 10 wins again, and not much past that. So, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the Eagles are going to have to win games in a far different fashion. They're going to have to win it with good defense and good special teams, and sort of managing things on offense, as you say, not making turnovers, not making the game-changing mistakes, getting a good running game. And the potential for that is there if Ryan Matthews can somehow stay healthy. That's a big if. We all understand that. But if all that comes together, and granted it might be a perfect storm, yeah, then the Eagles can compete in a bad division. The problem is there's too many ifs. And if Ryan Matthews is healthy, if Sam Bradford can stay away from the game-changing mistake, if the receivers can at least catch the footballs they're supposed to catch, there's a lot of ifs. And usually in the NFL, all those ifs don't turn into reality.
Speaking of reality, John, Caleb Sturgis got a load of reality last night. Apparently, he. I mean, this is one of the most bizarre things I've ever heard, John. I mean, he's literally walking around apparently without his helmet on, gets hit in the head with a football, and I saw a couple tweets last night of guys saying, "I was wondering why Caleb Sturgis was laying on the ground without anybody around him." I mean, I have never heard of, John, a guy getting a concussion like this.
You know, it's funny, and I wrote about it because yesterday on the show with you and Pete, I said, Caleb won the job. And if he can just stay away from being injured, he's going to be the kicker of the Philadelphia Eagles. And I feel bad because he goes out there in the pregame, and he gets concussed from an errant punt. And, yeah, it's astonishing. Everything he can say, and he's opened the door for Cody Parkey. That's a difficult place to kick, Heinz Field. It's one of the more difficult places in the NFL because it's situated right on the Three Rivers there, and some of the winds can be very, very treacherous. Now, obviously, it was the summer. It was a nice day, so it's not as bad as it would be, say, late in the season, but Parkey was able to make a 40-yard field goal, and we'll see. I mean, now Sturgis has got to go through the concussion protocol. But the longer he's out, and as we've seen with those concussion protocols, it could be one day, it could be 4 weeks. So it's how quickly he can get back on the field because he had this job all but sewn up before that happened.
We're talking with John McMullen, our 97.3 Eagles Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. He also covers the NFL for today's Pigskin. John, this situation with Josh Brown. The NFL released a statement, and I mean, I read the statement, John, and it's just a bunch of blah, 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 blah from what I read. But it seems like this is a bad job of the NFL, who came down hard on a guy like Ray Rice, who pretty much, I guess you could say at this point, people realize that Greg Hardy is just a cancer and he shouldn't be around. But then they only give one game to Josh Brown, and I don't understand the double standard.
Well, the NFL is in a difficult situation here. And I'll tell first of all, in the Ray Rice situation, actually that started all this acrimony between Roger Goodell and the players where James Harrison's calling him a crook. Remember, originally, Roger Goodell only gave Ray Rice a 2-game penalty. And he only gave him that 2-game penalty because he was the commissioner that the players want. And he listened to Ray's now wife, Janae, who begged for leniency. He took into account that Ray had not gotten in trouble before, and he went with the 2 games. The public outcry, the court of public opinion, was so outraged, he became embarrassed, and he turned tail, so to speak, and he resuspended him, and then it came double jeopardy, and that's what started this entire series of events, which has gone on to Greg Hardy, it's gone on to Adrian Peterson, and now it's gone on to Josh Brown. But I would just say this to people who are outraged at the NFL right now with Josh Brown. Forget about the NFL. Why isn't this guy in trouble legally? I don't understand why people look at this league and expect it to be a moral compass. The reality of the situation is Brown wasn't arrested. There's only so much you can do. If the legal process doesn't go forward, it's not like you could suspend the guy for the whole year. Then he's going to sue you, and you have no legal grounds to do it. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And I think before people need to start on the NFL, if they're that upset about it, they got to look at the legal situation, wonder why the police and the district attorney didn't do anything.
Speaking of suspensions, it looks like Le'Veon Bell's suspension has been reduced to 3 games. It's being labeled in some reports as there was a settlement agreement. So I want to ask you, John, translate what a settlement agreement is.
Well, the PED policy is different than the personal conduct policy. The personal conduct policy, which is what the players have such issues over, basically Roger Goodell is the so-called judge, jury, and executioner, and he has absolute power. And as they often say, with absolute power, it corrupts absolutely. And when it comes to PEDs and substance abuse, both sides, the union and the league, got together. There's neutral arbitration now, ever since 2 years ago when they put HGH into the policy. And so that's why you're more likely to get these types of settlements, because they don't want to go to arbitration, either side. So maybe you'll get a game to go down, and that's what happened with Le'Veon Bell for missed tests. So we're down from 4 games to 3 games. But again, people need to realize there's a different structure for the substance abuse and the PED policies than the personal conduct policy.
We've been talking with John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, also covers the NFL for today's Pigskin. John, one more quick question for you. I don't know how much you got to see the other preseason games last night, but one of the interesting things is that you have a situation where the Bengals and the Lions are playing, and you have 2 wide receiver corps going in different directions. You have the Lions, who took one of the receivers from the Bengals, and they actually look like they're going to be okay without Calvin Johnson, while the Bengals, now Boyd looks like he may have suffered an injury, and it seems like no one's going to be healthy aside from A.J. Green this year. So can you talk about the different directions for those 2 teams here?
Well, the Bengals, I've talked about it before. In a lot of ways, they sort of missed their window when they were one of the more talented teams in the NFL. I still think it's a really good team. But they had a chance. If you looked at their roster, especially last year from 1 through 53, it was one of the best 2 or 3 in football. And when you have guys like A.J. Green, who's a legitimate number 1 receiver, and then he's complemented by Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, players like that, they get to free agency. They, of course, leave for the bigger contracts, and you have to replace them, and it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, and they're having issues. Tyler Eifert is also injured, so it's going to be. I wouldn't say the window's completely closed, because, as I said, they still have a heck of a lot of good football players, but they're not nearly as deep as they once were. And for Detroit, they're going about things a different way. It was all Calvin Johnson, and now you understand you can't replace a Hall of Fame level talent, and you just can't do it. So they've gone in a different direction, and they're going to try to spread the ball around, whether it's Golden Tate, Marvin Jones. Remember, they have Theo Riddick, who's probably the best pass receiving running back in football, and they're going to see if they can spread the football around. The problem for the Lions is they're in the NFC North with the Vikings and Packers, and that's really difficult to deal with.
John, appreciate you coming on a Friday. Enjoy your weekend, and Don't worry, Mike will be back in the saddle on Monday.
I'm going to miss you, Josh. You'll be there.
I'll be in the background.
All right, bye.